nienteForte is celebrating its landmark 10th season, sponsored by the National Performance Network. You can join us in championing contemporary music in New Orleans with a tax-deductible donation. Donating can get you some great perks, including early access to these roundtables, signed posters and programs from our featured performers, signed music scores from our featured composers, and even custom handwritten miniature compositions from composers in the nienteForte community. For more information, go to nienteForte.com/donate. Our next event is on February 6th at Tulane University, featuring the Portland Percussion Group. Be sure to keep up to date about all of our events on social media. Follow our official nienteForte Contemporary Music Facebook page and our Twitter and Instagram pages under the handle NF_NOLA. Hi everyone, and welcome to the nienteForte Roundtable, where we talk with featured composers and performers from our nienteForte Contemporary Music Annual Concert Series. Our 10th season opened with the Byrne Kozar duo comprised of soprano Corrine Byrne and trumpeter Andy Kozar. They've been praised as creating an arresting symbiosis in their melding of voice and trumpet timbres by textura, and the recording of Scott Woolsugar's work, Bring Something Incomprehensible into This World, is a part of an album that was named a Notable Recordings of the Year by The New Yorker in 2017. They did a concert with us in mid-October at Sidebar NOLA, and they also did a student composition reading and masterclass at Tulane University the next day. Corrine and Andy, thanks for kicking off our season.
Yeah,
thanks so much for having us.
Absolutely. Trumpet soprano, for me, it seems like a pretty unique combination as a performing duo. How did this whole thing get started, and did you have something in particular that you were trying to accomplish when you started this duo?
Yeah, we started playing together many years ago, but actually in Baroque music. So while there wasn't a ton of repertoire for trumpet and soprano now, there actually is a fair amount of Baroque repertoire that features natural trumpet, soprano voice, and continuo of some sort. So the first stuff that we did was Bach cantatas, Milani cantatas, sort of
some Purcell, Scarlatti thrown in there.
Yeah, so we had a lot of fun working together, so decided to try to work with some composers to develop some contemporary music, some new repertoire for the instrumentation, and started asking friends and colleagues for pieces back in 2015, trying to basically continue where that repertoire left off a couple hundred years ago.
That's interesting. So did it feel like a pretty natural transition? Like, because Baroque is clearly something that's very different from the contemporary kind of music. I know that you have background in contemporary performance and all that kind of stuff, but did it feel like jarring at all to kind of go from the Baroque thing, or is there kind of a harmony to that between the Baroque and the contemporary music in your mind?
I think there's definitely a correlation. I think it became more and more natural as the more we did it, and the Scott Woolsugar piece is the first piece that was written for us. So it was a great first piece for us because the whole point of the piece was melding our timbres together, and so we kind of realized we could do that in a way. And we do that in our Baroque repertoire too, in a slightly different way, but we blend our timbres there as well. So there's definitely some correlations, but the whole thing with Scott Woolsugar's piece is that bring something incomprehensible into this world is kind of how I think of the birth of our duo as being, bringing something new and incomprehensible or kind of interesting into this world. And so that's, that was the birth of kind of us creating new repertoire for ourselves in a way that, people didn't typically expect to hear trumpet and soprano, if that answers the question.
Yeah.
Sure. So how does that feel now that, because you said around 2015 or so was kind of like the first time that started happening? How does that feel? How's that changed now? Or how do you feel like the direction of the duo now, or the repertoire for the duo now, or where you are personally with it, or how more comfortable you are with it now?
Yeah, now I think it's just more. So it's really fun to do. So we're continually seeking out composers to write new stuff for us. We have a couple years of commissions planned, but we're also digging around and finding more early music for us to be doing, and have also just starting this past spring doing some concerts that are the first half are a period performance of early music with continuo, and then the second half is a bunch of new stuff for the duo. So I think in terms of growth or trajectory, more.
Yeah, no,
Just
absolutely.
like more repertoire, continue to build, continue to grow.
Yeah, sure. And the concert that you did at Sidebar, I mean, there was a little bit of that blend since you did a couple of pieces by Hildegard and kind of your interpretation of that too. And it's, I don't know, I feel like the way that it's programmed is really fascinating because contemporary music can just be so many different things anyway, right? So just kind of putting that stuff in there.
And I think also the reason a lot of times why early music goes so well with new music is I think that there's they both from performance of these repertoires come from a place of sort of searching and from discovery. We don't know exactly how this early music sounded. We have the treatises, but often they're giving contrary information. There are lots of different choices we can make about how to play, in the same way that with this new music, no one knows how this stuff goes until we sort of figure it out and start doing it a bunch. So I think it comes from a sort of a similar approach. So in that way, I think doing those two types of musics together feels very natural.
Sure. How did you come to the Hildegard and make the decision to make that a part of your repertoire and a part of your concert?
We came to that actually from Corrine. There's not really any medieval music for Baroque trumpet.
Yeah, my early music group, Ensemble Musica Umana, we have a Hildegard program, and have spent a lot of time looking at these chants and transcribing them. And so we had these chants kind of there ready to go, and I thought it would be neat to experiment with them as a duo and see what kinds of things we could do with it. And it also, is differently than when we do Baroque music next to our new stuff, like in Oklahoma when we did that for the first time, when we put half Baroque and half new on the program. I think the Hildegard, like Andy was saying, there's more experimentation you can do with it because
Right.
It's not totally clear how free, and sometimes on the original notation you can't even tell what's going on, and so a lot of it is guessing, and a lot of it is like trying things and then going back and going, maybe that's not the right note, it looks maybe like it's this note, and there's just more experimenting you can do with it.
More room for interpretation by the performer.
Yeah, and then also it's just one melody, so we have the creative go ahead to try different drones, and we played with when to add a fifth on the melodica, or when to drop down and just have the fifth, and when to just do the tonic note, and when to we call them Hildegard noodles, improvising in the style of Hildegard. And so there's just a lot more. It feels no different than any of the new music we do in that sense.
When you do your Baroque programming with your contemporary stuff, is it half and half or intertwined, or?
We've done it half and half, mostly as like a technical concern.
Logistical.
Sure.
Logistics, and also like the experience of playing Baroque trumpet is very different from the experience of playing modern trumpet. And it's already a little tricky to do Baroque on first half and modern on second half, and the idea of going back and forth piece to piece, it could be potentially treacherous.
Sure, right. For those that aren't aware, the two of you are not only a performing duo, but you're also married. Kind of curious if you've come across any challenges in separating out your personal versus professional life when it comes to how you approach, say, the performance of a piece or just the business of the duo.
I don't know. I mean, I think no.
What about you, Corrine? Do you have a different answer?
I was gonna say yes, not well, but maybe it's because I personally find myself trying to remind myself to treat our duo the same way I would treat any other professional endeavor or group that I'm a part of, because there are times where maybe the guard is down a little bit more, so I might give a comment or vice versa that I wouldn't necessarily give to a colleague. And so just remembering that, yes, we're married and we can be really open and say what's on our mind, but when it comes to the music, sometimes it's actually better to really, treat each other the way we would treat any colleague in any rehearsal situation. So maybe that's just me having to remind myself of that. I think that Andy does a really good job of that already. then yeah, I mean, just even in the past couple weeks when it comes to rehearsing, I think we have figured out that, just like any other group, we have to put our rehearsals in the calendar and really plan and not just, oh, well, we'll see each other later, so we'll just rehearse at some point after dinner or whatever. It's like we have to treat it, put in that extra effort to put things in the calendar and do things the way we would in any other group.
I think that's right. I don't know that I have anything else to say about that.
Okay, that's cool.
It's good too, just in terms of us knowing each other really well. Musically, there's huge benefits to that, because we just sort of vibe well, and it feels really natural and easy to communicate. Because I think married people can communicate
read each
without
other's minds
words, and so when you put that into a musical situation, that can be really, really good, really easy.
Has it revealed anything new to each other as either professionals or just people? Have you discovered anything new about your partner from being in the duo as opposed to before?
I don't know about that so much as I think the thing that's interesting is that at first it can sort of feel like, oh, this is my person, so we can just rehearse whenever we live together. We can do that. The interesting thing for me was that we actually do, in order to be efficient and to do a good job, we actually have to treat it like separate the spousalness from it. And like Corrine was saying, like we have rehearsal from 5 to 7:30 in this room, right? And so we actually try not to rehearse at home. Try to rehearse at Longy where we both work, and sort of we have to take steps to make sure we stay on task and don't slip into like domestic life while rehearsing or thinking about dinner or who's doing laundry or these sort of things, and actually like turn off that part of the relationship just to like, okay, we have to work for 2.5 hours or 3 hours or whatever. So that's sort of interesting, but I think that's I think that has less to do with like learning more about her or me or something, and more just like learning how to work, like how best this group of people, the two of us, work, which is, I think different from any other group of people working together, but also the idea that like we have to schedule things, I think is kind of an interesting, kind of a funny thing.
Right.
Despite the fact it's not that we have to schedule things to make sure we're in the same place at the same time. It's like we have to schedule things just to get our brains in the place to do a different kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Corrine, I know that in November of 2018, you were a featured performer alongside of Emily Yap Chua at Randolph in a concert that featured a wide range of works from female composers and generally put a spotlights on women's stories and women's rights. Can you speak a little bit more about that experience?
Sure. Yeah, I was excited to be asked to do this recital at Randolph. So Emily is a wonderful pianist, solo pianist and collaborator, and she's the chair down there at Randolph College in the music department, and she invited me to do this recital with her. They have this initiative where they have to program a certain number of works by women and by people of color on every single concert they do, which is a wonderful thing. It's also not that hard to do. I mean, it's just one of these things where if you don't make that effort, it can so easily become programs of dead white men.
Absolutely.
And that's just kind of the way it's always been. And so even though it's so easy to find these wonderful pieces by diverse composers, having that initiative, I think, is a really amazing thing because it gets people thinking. And so there were two composers specifically that I was really interested in working with. One of them is Melissa Dunphy in Philadelphia, and I contacted her, and I was really drawn to her pieces based on texts of Nikita Gill, specifically kind of the song cycle that reflected somebody's journey through trauma and healing. And then the very last movement is a trio called Me Too, and really powerful text. And so I included that on the recital, and I also was really interested in Nilu Nurbakhsh, who is an Iranian composer, who I heard her work at the Song Slam competition, and it was a beautiful setting of Pablo Neruda texts. So I was really interested in what else she had, and she also had a lot of pieces that were based on, current events. And so she had this really powerful aria based on the Muslim ban, and this very like resistance aria based on that. And then she also was writing an opera based on her experiences in Iran and sort of fleeing Iran because of the violence in the 2008 presidential election there and during the protests. So we talked a little bit about which piece to do, and I just thought like the recital was going in a direction of like really bringing to light things that were happening now, and the violence and the protesting that's happening in many different countries over many different issues. So we decided to put the aria, one of the scenes from the opera, We the Innumerable, from her opera, on the program as well. And then I also put on the Strauss Ophelia Lieder, and the recital started to take shape sort of like women's struggles and how they cope with these different events and things. So I put the Ophelia on there, and I put the Kurt Weill Seven Deadly Sins, a couple movements of that. And then Emily brought to my attention these lighter, kind of sweeter stories that were set to music by Liana Kirchhoff. And so we put those on there as sort of like the relief, because everything was very heavy and very, very dark. But it was an amazing thing. I love working with living composers, and so being able to chat with Nilu and Melissa about these pieces and be able to now, having a lot of students that are interested in new music, guide them to these composers that they've never heard of, because they're just now getting into that world of like, oh, this is a thing. I can actually, be singing music that is being written right now. So it was a great thing for me to be involved in that initiative, and then also to get to know these composers a little better, and to bring, shed a little bit of light on the things going on.
Sure. No, that's absolutely awesome. Can you comment on what you think that the progress that, I guess not just necessarily contemporary music, but just kind of the music community, what sort of progress you think that it has done to this point to be more inclusive, featuring women composers, women performers, or anything like that? On the composer side, clearly, just because that's more my field, I know that there could be a lot more effort made to make sure that more women composers and people of color's compositions are featured. I guess I don't know a whole lot about, say, the performance side, even like for vocalists or for even trumpet players or anything like that, what sort of dominance there is as your white male kind of field, or versus women versus people of color and diversity in general.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Unfortunately, I don't think we're where we want to be, but I do notice a lot of initiatives like this, and a lot of scholarships and grants and organizations trying to promote music by women and by people of color. But I think it's still a struggle. I mean, even when we're putting together our program for last night, I mean, we're sitting there trying to pick, because we have pieces written by women, but we happened to not put those on the program last night, and for all these other reasons. Like, it wasn't for any specific reason, but when it comes down to it, it's something that takes that extra effort to make sure that you're just mindful of that, because there's also, when you're putting together a traditional recital, there's all this amazing repertoire that you want to perform for various reasons, and then you look at it and you're like, well, what am I really saying when I present this recital? And so I think we're finally getting to a point where we're kind of aware of that, and now that I have this position at Longy and thinking about future programming and what operas are we going to put on, and trying to diversify a little bit and think outside the box. And I think specifically Longy is doing a really good job of pushing the envelope in that direction, and hopefully other music schools will do the same, so that when the students graduate, they will already be of that mindset, and they're not of that mindset only when they've encountered people in the field, but like in school is where I think that should happen. And so, things like the Randolph Initiative and what Longy is doing, and I think a lot of schools are probably doing the same thing, but I think the more that happens, the better.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, I feel like a lot of that is about planting those seeds, because that kind of change is always going to be something that's going to be a long game, and something that's going to have to be gradual, but you have to put in that work and not see the immediate progress, but know and hope that that's going to be something that's going to have its benefits and rewards like decades later, and to try to set that sort of change the mentality around that sort of conversation, which is always going to be kind of a slow thing.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's awesome. Andy, you're the executive director and a founding performer with Load Bang, an ensemble that features baritone voice, bass clarinet, trumpet, and trombone. Is there a specific moment in your 10-plus year long history that you identify as the transition from just four guys just making music together and just trying to make it in this competitive contemporary music scene to, yeah, I think we know what we're doing and we know how to make a living out of this?
Ooh. I don't know that there was one specific moment. I mean, I do think that it's worth noting that that we started the group when we were in school, but didn't start it because of school. I mean, we met because of school, but we started the group, and from the very beginning, we were never taking the group for chamber music credit or anything. We, from the very beginning, even though we didn't know exactly what it could turn into, we were treating it as if it was like a professional organization. So despite the fact that like most professional organizations make money, in the first couple years we exclusively lost money, or we were all putting money into the project from our own individual sort of bank accounts. But we were of the mindset from the very beginning that this is a professional group, this is a thing we can do. So we just kept working at it and sort of had the core belief that we're doing good work, we're getting really good repertoire, we're playing it at a very high level and hopefully getting better and better and better at it. So yeah, I'm not sure that there was a clear moment where there was like a switch. I think that there were encouraging things that happened along the line that gave us like outside like reinforcement that like, oh, we can do this because we're getting support from particular people, or you know, when a composer like David Lang agrees to write a thing for us very early, like little things like that make you feel like you can do it because there are these people who have been doing it and do it at an extraordinarily high level and believe that you can do it and are willing to spend time and energy on you. But yeah, so I think like because that was our mindset from the very beginning, then it's just been sort of taking that same mindset and continuing to grow the organization.
Sure. Do you remember the first time that happened? That you got like some sort of, I don't know, like a big name or like recognition from the outside that helped validate what you were doing?
Very early on, maybe in our first year or so, we were invited to play at the Stone in New York, which is John Zorn's venue, and that felt meaningful. Like that felt because that came from one of our teachers at Manhattan School was curating for that month and invited us to play. So that felt really nice. Soon after that was when David agreed to write a thing for us, and then a few years later when Charles Warren agreed to write a piece for us, and it sort of things escalated in that way. And not that I don't know. I mean, not that we necessarily needed that to help us keep going, but it certainly helped to have people, very well-respected people in the community, taking the time to come to a show, taking the time to write for you, taking the time to just sort of tell you that they think that what you're doing is great, as these little encouraging bits that help you sort of keep plowing forward, especially in early years when you need that sort of momentum to keep going.
Sure, absolutely. How do you see Load Bang different now from when you first started it? Or what do you see the direction of Load Bang going now that makes the ensemble still continue to evolve?
I think that the nature of what we do forces evolution, right? The fact that we don't have repertoire to fall back. I mean, that's not completely true now. 11 years in, we have over 300 pieces for the group, and many of them are very, very strong, and we play all the time and are touring with them. But we don't have repertoire to fall back on in the same way that groups with an instrumentation with pre-existing repertoire do. So the fact that for us, the way to continue getting music is by commissioning, that forces evolution, right? That forces us to constantly be looking to the next thing. It forces us to constantly be looking to the next people we want to work with and continuing to cultivate a really wide and diverse body of composers that we're working with. So in terms of future growth, I think that aspect of it is built into the way we work. And then on the other end, which is like concerts that we're booking, is, you know, the more and more that we do, the more and more opportunities seem to arise. So in terms of growth, I think for us it's just keep on keeping on, which is fun, especially at this point now, 11 years, we kind of know what we're doing. So now the idea of keeping on is good because we know what that means. Like we know how to keep on. We don't have to sort of refigure out, or not refigure out so much as like we don't need to figure out how to grow. The growth is like inherent in the institution.
Sure. Is there a change that you've seen? Like, I guess for either of you, did you see any kind of change in the history of your contemporary performance in how compositions are? Like, is there an evolution to the kinds of material that you're getting, or is it just kind of really dependent on the personality, regardless of the year that you're getting the commission or anything like that? Like, is music moving? Is contemporary music moving in a particular direction?
Oh, I mean, I don't want to speak to that because I'm not sure that like. I'm sure it is moving in. I mean, I guess what I mean to say is that it's moving in lots of directions. I think one of the really cool things about working now is that there's this plurality of voices, so that there's no one direction in which contemporary music is going. You can just, it's as easy as getting on the internet and seeing like the diversity of things people are coming up with and doing. Specific to load bang, I mean, I'm not sure that I've noticed any trends, but I think it does help for composers now that are writing for the group that there is a great deal of repertoire that we've already premiered, and a lot of which is on commercial recordings that people can go and listen to. And so there is a potential model if people would like to take, like you can listen to what the group sounds like on a bunch of different pieces and learn from that. Whereas the first composers that were writing for us, it was really like clean slate. No idea what this could be even.
Sure.
So I think that's informative for composers.
Probably the same is true for this duo then too, because trumpet and voice is just such a unique kind of duet to have too. And I know that a lot of people, when some people that I've kind of talked to, is like they didn't really have a good handle on how they would want to listen to that or how they would want to write that. So even putting the stuff that you're doing as a trumpet and soprano duo is like kind of helping to define the map of what's happening with trumpet and soprano, or trumpet and voice in general kind of music, and that's really fascinating.
Yeah, totally.
Exactly. Which is again why I'm always going back to like how lucky we were to have that first piece that really showcased the hybrid instrument that can be created with trumpet and voice, because I think a lot of the pieces we got after that used that same concept in different ways. And the more pieces we've done, the more possibilities composers can hear and then have ideas, knowing what sounds good, what maybe doesn't sound good, and
build from that.
Right. So yeah, it was sort of like an experiment, and then became very much a reality. And I feel like over the years it's become more and more defined, like what the duo is, which is exciting.
That's actually a good segue, because I wanted to take this opportunity to play a segment from a piece that was written specifically for you, and then talk about it afterward. This is an excerpt from Eternal Return by Reiko Feuding. What can you tell me about this work? It does some fascinating interplay between the trumpet and the voice, and to me has a very intriguing and unique kind of textural vocabulary. Can you talk a little bit about what that's about and also the composition process around that or anything?
Yeah, I can speak to it a little bit. Reiko, I think, Reiko's a really incredible composer, and with all of his music that I've played and heard, there's a real depth of listening. So you can listen to it on a surface level, and it's really lovely and really fascinating, and then you can dive a level deeper, and you can see how he's taking these little bits of material and reusing them or slightly adjusting them, and then there's another layer down where you can listen to like even the smaller material, and so it can be a complex listening experience, or you can just sort of chill out and listen to it, and all of these different ways of listening to it are valid, and all are really enjoyable in different ways. For this particular piece, Eternal Return, he had this idea that it's eternal return of the small. So there are a lot of these really, really small gestures. So in the trumpet part, for instance, just air sounds moving downward chromatically. And this repeats over and over and over again, but is never quite the same. So it often is sped up, very gradually sped up throughout the piece. Sometimes it happens over and over and over again, but at a very, very fast rate of moving through the pitches. And he does this with, I think, a lot of the material. So there's an idea of repetition, there's an idea of the return of this material, but it's never quite the same, which I think is something that is in a lot of his music, and I think really makes it super interesting. He also does a lot of really very cool shading. I think you can hear it very clearly when Corrine is singing and I'm playing, and we're not in unisons, but we're in the same register and in very pitch-wise very close, and have these slow glissandos down, these kind of smearings, where, even when I'm listening back to the recording that I made of this piece that like we've been doing a long time, there are these moments where I can't totally tell if I'm the one making that sound or if it's Corrine.
Absolutely. That's such a unique thing that you wouldn't think could happen between a trumpet and a voice, but yet, absolutely, that piece pulls it off very successfully.
Yeah, absolutely.
When Corrine and I talk about it a bunch, and the idea, especially as people that are like, I teach trumpet, and in Corrine teaching voice, we talk a lot about issues that our students have, and it's really interesting to us that my solutions for my students are almost always exactly the same as her solutions for her students with very similar issues. This sort of is a bit of an aside from Reiko's piece, but I think ties back in that the idea, the way that we produce sound as trumpet and as a singer is really exactly the same. So unlike a woodwind instrument where you're dealing with a reed, or a string instrument where you're dealing with like string on steel now, basically what's happening for us is we have two pieces of meat that are vibrating against each other as air passes through some sort of resonating cavity, and then you use that, right? So for us, our vibrating flesh is just our lips, and then the cavity that we're able to make sound out of, make music out of, is the actual trumpet. Obviously for Corrine, the vibration is happening somewhere else, and then you use a bunch of other...
vibration is in the larynx, but the cavity is it's a combination of the chest, the larynx, but those aren't the primary ones. It's actually the pharynx and the head.
And I think because of the fact that our tone production comes from the same sort of mechanism, there's actually a lot of similarity in timbre. So you could, if you put Corrine in a practice room 50 yards away from me in a practice room, and you both had us just doing long tone stuff, like, you may not be able to tell what instrument is in what room doing it. And I think a lot of our favorite pieces are composers that recognize this, or by composers that recognize this and sort of exploit this, how closely related the two instruments are. And I think Ryko does a really good example of that. Also because there's a lot of mouth sounds, there's a lot of spoken stuff, both for Corrine and in the trumpet part. So he's using the things that we each do that are very, very similar to each other.
Yeah, to create that deliberate sort of, not exactly obscurity, but it's kind of taking, like when you have two different woodwinds and it kind of creates a new timbre from the combination of both of those things. That same sort of idea, like that you were a combined single instrument as opposed to two separate instruments that are even conversing with each other,
right.
Which I think is really fascinating. I guess also talking about a different piece, contemporary music listeners might not be quite so aware that works by living composers can sometimes be incredibly collaborative between the composer and the performers. And you told me that, and this was particularly true of a piece that was written for you by Jeffrey Gavitt, since he lives like literally downstairs to you or something like that, right? Can you talk about that piece? What was the name of that piece again?
Proof of Concept for Floating Child.
Right.
Yeah, so when Jeff was working on this piece, he started by just doing very, very small sketches. And he would check it out with me, sort of work out some of the trumpet stuff, work out some of the microtonal things that he was working on, and then he'd give it to Corrine and I, and we'd go down and we would just read through these things, and we'd talk about what worked, whether it was, do we want to, like, what dynamic does it work best at? One of the things, I guess, let me take a step back, one of the things he was looking to do with his piece is to write for us in a way that activates these subtones so that you're able to hear these much lower fundamentals based on what we're doing. So we spend a lot of time, because it's the difference between theoretically what should work and then actually what works. So
Sure.
He had a bunch of ideas about what theoretically should work, and then we spent some time playing through those in different ways and finding out which of those pairings of notes actually spoke the best or activated that the best.
And which vowel?
And which vowel, and what muting for me, and dynamics. Does it work as well at piano as if, we sort of bump the dynamic up a little bit.
So before even giving us a full draft of the piece, he might have given us a page, and then we would go down to his apartment and try it out, and so it kind of went in cycles.
Right.
So it was pretty collaborative in that sense that he would write just a little bit, we'd try it out, and then it would inform how he would continue doing it.
And I think that, that's not always how people work. It's not always necessary even. I mean, I think Jeff could have written a great piece even if we didn't have that, but I think it can be a really helpful way to make sure that, especially when you're dealing with a piece that has all these sort of theoretical ideas about what things should happen acoustically based on the things that you're writing, having a chance to try those out, to workshop them, is really helpful. And it basically ensures that if you're going to spend all this time trying to figure out this stuff and write a piece that works, it's nice to know as you're doing it that it actually will work, and you don't spend all this time and then you finish a thing and it was a cool idea, but for whatever reason
didn't work out. Yeah, right.
And I think that's one of the reasons that the piece, I think one of the reasons that it is so strong is that there was this sort of deep understanding. I mean, he's a singer, but he also spends a whole lot of his life with me as the singer in Load Bang. So we he gets singing, he knows Corrine's voice really well, and he also knows what I can do. So then with that, combined with the fact that then putting us together and doing these little workshops to figure stuff out, feels like a very personalized piece.
Sure. And kind of, because sometimes, especially with composers that are no longer living, but even if you're kind of taking a look at a piece of music from that, not knowing the composer, not really talking to the composer, there's a little bit of a separation in some ways between then the composer's intent versus the performer's intent, or how they decide to write the piece and all that. And I think it's always nice to be able to work directly with the performers in general and kind of give them the opportunity to have some ownership of how the composition is going to work, especially if it's written specifically for them. Just kind of know, what of this do you really like, and what do you want to do, and how do you want this piece to speak? And that stuff is always a lot of fun.
Right, and then especially too, I think when we inevitably record the piece, Jeff will be involved with the recording, and so then the sort of final document for anyone who's interested in this thing that we did exists and can be used as a reference for people who want to do it moving forward. I think that's a really cool and important thing.
Sure, absolutely. I just want to wrap this up with one final question. Based on what you've personally seen come across like your table in composition, what's the most important piece of advice that you would give to aspiring composers as performers of contemporary music in general, but also within your particular instrument?
For me, it's clarity. Clarity of score is so important. So for young composers, I encourage them to think about the score as if it's their only way of communicating with their performer what it is that they want to happen. It's likely not, right? Because we can email, we can call, we can do these things. But as clear as you can be, clear about ideas, clear about notation, clear about beaming, clear about all of these things that you learn in music school and are kind of boring, they're so important. Because anytime a score is not clear, it creates a barrier between the composer and the performer. It creates miscommunication, essentially, or the possibility for miscommunication. And so if you can avoid that, then you can get people playing your music right away as opposed to trying to decode unnecessarily.
Having to explain a bunch of things.
Right. That's not to say that young composers in general, shouldn't write things that need to be explained necessarily. But if it can be communicated clearly right off the bat, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was in my undergraduate, I was in a music theory class with a professor that this was before notation programs were really popular, so we did everything pencil paper, and we would get docked off a point for every beam or bar line that was not done with a straight edge. He was so picky about that and about spacing and all that kind of thing. That just really bred in me really early on just how important clarity of notation can really help with.
It can also make or break a performance.
Absolutely, right? It can, for sure. Because if you've practiced it, just being able to visually understand what's kind of going on at that moment is something that's just so vital and important.
Right.
Yeah. How about you, Corrine?
Yeah. So I guess my advice for young aspiring composers would be to be open, collaborative, and generous. So just being really kind of out there. Don't spend all your time just with yourself, and work with people, try things, be experiential, and take feedback. Because the more you work with established composers and taking their feedback and seeing how they interact with performers and how they do things, the better that'll inform you. And also the more that you take things to a performer and workshop it, the more you know for yourself for the next time you're writing for a specific group or a specific person. So yeah, I mean, I think that's not just for composers, that's for every musician, just to not spend so much time agonizing over you alone doing your craft, but getting out there and just working with people and getting feedback early on.
That's kind of good life advice, really.
Yeah.
Actually, in general, just not being isolated out. So.
Right.
Sweet. Well, that's all I have. I guess the other thing is, what do you have coming up? Like, what's next on the agenda for Byrne Kozar Duo?
We have a little bit of time now for a bunch of separate projects that we're doing. I have a bunch of low bank stuff and some solo stuff, and Corrine has some ensemble singing and some opera stuff coming up. So our next thing is not until late January. And then in the spring we have late January, we're going to be up at Eastman. We're going to be at SUNY Fredonia. We're doing a concert at Longy. We're doing a concert at a working crypt in New York City. A working crypt. I'm not sure how you talk about crypts.
A working?
Yeah, it's an actively accepting more bodies crypt in New York City. It's a beautiful acoustic space. So we're doing that. Am I missing anything?
Well, continuing to work on getting more commissions. We have a few coming, but then just kind of looking ahead to who we want to work with and what kinds of pieces we want to be doing.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time to do this roundtable with us, and thanks for doing the performance. It's a pleasure to have you in New Orleans, and hopefully we'll be able to have the chance to collaborate again soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much. Great to chat with you.
Sweet. Absolutely. nienteForte is celebrating its landmark 10th season, sponsored by the National Performance Network. You can join us in championing contemporary music in New Orleans with a tax-deductible donation. Donating can get you some great perks, including early access to these roundtables, signed posters and programs from our featured performers, signed music scores from our featured composers, and even custom handwritten miniature compositions from composers in the nienteForte community. For more information, go to nienteForte.com/donate. Our next event is on February 6th at Tulane University, featuring the Portland Percussion Group. Be sure to keep up to date about all of our events on social media. Follow our official nienteForte Contemporary Music Facebook page and our Twitter and Instagram pages under the handle NF_NOLA.